Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Heath Mullins. I'm a former Forrester analyst as well as the chief evangelist with Extra Hop Networks. I've invited a group of outstanding panelists here today, and we're going to go over a lot of the things about Zero Trust. Zero Trust has really been at the forefront of everybody's mind in the government for quite some time now, and for a very good reason. Now, what's really happened, though, when it's come to implementation roadblocks, the stories have kind of changed a little bit. For the most part, they're kind of staying the same, whether you're dealing with attempting to find the correct things, you're trying to get things to work together, or just trying to get everything together, generally speaking. It can be a huge task and undertaking, and finding the best path forward is quite often something that has evaded the majority of folks out there. So, with that being said, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We have Sean Connolly, former CISA Executive Director and Global Zero Trust Strategy and Policy Director at Zscaler. Jared Quantz, Insider Threat Program Manager with the U.S. Coast Guard. Tom Statucci, IT Modernization Director with U.S. GSA. Justin Stoltman, sorry if I messed up your last name there, Justin, President's Management Council Fellow with the U.S. Department of State. Christopher Fenning, Engine Operations Division Knowledge Manager for the U.S. Navy, and Dr. Tina Rodrig, and I pronounced that correctly for sure, uh, she's the CISO with the Consumer Financial Protections Bureau. Thank you so much all for joining today. And we're just kind of jump right into this. I think this is going to be a fantastic session. So we're going to have kind of a focus on the networking aspect of Zero Trust today, but really more so around how it touches everything else. And when we're talking about everything else, I mean, the network really touches everything. So however you're trying to overcome or accommodate technologies within your stack, there tends to be a lot of hemming and hawing and a lot of gnashing of teeth and wailing of children, so on and so forth, when you're trying to get everything to actually work together. So Tom, I'd like to start out with you. Within the GSA, when you guys have really been working through this, what are some of the common challenges that you have faced from the GSA's perspective when you're trying to kind of push everything together, especially when we're having discussions around collapsing the technology stack or addressing adjacent opportunities or gaps within the network?
Yeah, Heath, I work on the policy side of GSA, so I'm more outward facing to the agencies.
Hmm.
But the one thing we stress with IT modernization is using your tools effectively and making sure network monitoring is at the heartbeat of all of your endpoints. And from that, you could really identify a lot of not only your threats, but you can enhance your network reliability or improve your security, find your root cause more quickly, and really understanding how that applications are flowing through your core network.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. That's something that kind of tends to evade. I don't want to say evade detection, but kind of falls to the wayside when folks are talking about things like blast radius and application dependencies. Speaking of things like that, Jared, I have a question for you. Given your role with insider threat management within the Coast Guard, how heavily are you guys relying on these kind of monitoring technologies and working collaboratively within enterprise IT and security to really understand what the blast radius of the attack was and what the overall impact was upon the organization?
Well, that's an interesting question. I was just meeting with the cybersecurity folks for the Coast Guard a little bit earlier this morning, and we were having a dialogue very similar to that. So the user activity monitoring tools that we use are core to my program, which I think goes without saying. And we don't necessarily suffer from some of the same complications that some of our brothers in over in, let's say, DoD or the IC might suffer from, which is not having some of these technologies deployed on some of their other domains, whether that be the unclassified domain or whatever. Luckily for us, we have that here, so we don't suffer from that, but we do have a little bit of growing to do with regard to comprehending the different visualization tools between the owners. So the net defenders, they have a host-based visibility, and that's good for some of our local endpoints. They have some bit of data visibility into our cloud infrastructure where some of our tools can't reach that are monitored by third parties. Not a lot of visualization. It's still a lot of data. So we struggle a little bit with reconciling that from a data perspective and trying to coalesce the types of data that we're aggregating independently into a unified site picture, analytically going out, and then trying to really get a strong idea, at least between the folks that actually have a actual visualization, meaning like a video capable tool, not just the ability to see data, but to put visual context with it. Just understanding the difference between when the net defense and system centric tools have the upper hand versus the UAM types that are more user centric, and how to best blend those in an interlocking fields of fire sort of way. That's sort of the learning point we're at right now. We've luckily gotten past the point of knowing who lives in the visibility pillar, but actually coming together to create kind of a unified product. That's where we're at. We've got the information, let's say intel, if you will, the external intel feeds coming in that are helping us direct onto adversarial targets, but just finally coalescing the visibility layer into what looks like one final site picture. That's sort of where we're at. But I would say it's working really well in the sense that we have folks that go up to the defense team from my team, and we have folks from the net defense and cybersecurity team, whether it's on the side that does the hunting or the side that does the incident response. They come down onto our team. That's the way we're put together today. I think on the outside, it probably looks like it works really well. And I think the Coast Guard does a very, very good job of ingesting information from us, from themselves, and then defending the network. And I think we do a really good job of doing the same with regard to insider threats. I don't know how well we appear to be doing a unified job for the stack itself. But once we get this last like coalesce visibility layer piece sort of fleshed out, I think we'll be in an even better state.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that, Jared. It's really interesting to hear how folks talk about, bringing everything together for the bigger picture rather than just sending a feed off to a SIM tool or some other data aggregation point and trying to make sense of the chaos as it just flows and rampages across the network. Dr. Rodrick, I do have a question for you, kind of based off of what Jared was going. As the CISO of a CFPB, so how have you been working within your organization to kind of collapse some of these pillars? Tool consolidation and cross training opportunities for your employees and your workers is very, very important. We're trying to reduce this sprawl and at the same time empower our folks that are internal to make the right decisions and the right calls at the right time. How have you taken that on within your organization?
For the workplace aspects, we were lucky enough to have an early take on this, that cyber workforce is not just those folks who report to cyber, but it's anyone who has a significant responsibility and can impact cyber. So we have an extensive training program on role-based training. We also have regular micro learnings and a really strong awareness program. But the most important aspect, I would say, is that we have for this part, is we have a cyber rotation program for on-the-job learning. So someone essentially can, walk a mile in our shoes, if you will, and they don't have to have any cyber training or background. They just come and literally learn on the street, which is how some of us came up.
Hmm.
And
I certainly did.
I certainly started the hard way. And then what that allows us to do is at least build that more than just intellectual capability to really feel the heat off the street and to understand how much work there is and how much we have to accomplish and how getting an A every day is really tough to do, even with automation, even with tools, even with people who are trained, and to see where those challenges lie, because I have yet to find a way to patch the people. So that's where we're working on that. And we've had people who were the largest resistors become the largest advocates for cyber and doing things the right way. So it's a way of quiet evangelism. And part of what I have thought of, but have not put in place is that you cause a breach, you come fix the breach, right? You cause an issue, you come fix the issue. Maybe not forever, but that way, instead of throwing rocks, we can build walls.
What an odd concept, accountability. That's really nice to hear, So speaking of odd concepts, there's been a big push. Digital transformation has been a really huge thing. Everybody's doing it to one degree or another. Whether it's reducing the footprint of your data center to lower your overhead costs, or just getting rid of the old technology that you can. We all know that there's old technology we can't get rid of because the dependencies that have been created in place for so long, it's really hard to get rid of. Justin, within the Department of State, you guys are really pushing towards this cloud-based initiative. Can you talk a little bit about how you're applying zero trust principles to this cloud-based initiative?
So yeah, so I can't speak for Department of State because I'm only here as a short interim position as a fellow, right? But I do come from Department of the Air Force, where I was the director of the Zero Trust program there, and can kind of talk about some of the challenges we faced there, and the race to the cloud and all those efforts that we had, right? And just our large IT modernization, and I think a lot of the struggles are common across all of the DoD and really a lot of the government as well. Our biggest challenge is scope. The sheer amount of things and data and endpoints that we have that we deem critical for the mission is so immense. It's very difficult to identify, protect, isolate, segment, all of these things. And so one of the early things that we tried to do was this initiative we called Race to the Cloud. And the idea here was, let's go through, identify how many applications we have, and let's get as many of those as we possibly can into the cloud. And if we got resistance from those application owners, we would ask why. Why can't your application be in the cloud? Because just by being in the cloud, you're going to get naturally a lot of these types of protections that are very hard to implement on an on-prem site. Just again, because of scope, right? Network complexity, and how we've bifurcated our VLANs over the past 2 decades. So, Race to the Cloud has been a huge effort and in trying to get that foot into zero trust, because it's a lot easier to do that within the cloud than it is on-prem.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with Steve Hazelhorst quite a bit on those initiatives as well. Everybody knows Steve too; he's a real good guy. So now that's this is some really good points. There's kind of a theme emerging here, right? As we're having these discussions, scope seems to be the killer. How do you address all the things while protecting all the things at the same time? It's great to go out and identify what are the keys to the kingdom. How can I best protect these? And what methods and methodologies am I going to put in place to ensure that this is done continuously in a repeatable fashion? Sean, it's your turn, buddy. I was going to wait for you to have to go off camera or something before I threw a question off you, or at you, but I'm going to let you off easy on this one. So, generally speaking, with your experience, working with stuff. So you and I worked together for many years. When you're really trying to push this effort forward quite often it's an uphill battle, as Dr. Rodrigue of course knows, and everybody on this call knows. It's a very uphill battle to try and make this sell internally, whether it's a lack of belief in the zero trust principles, or it seems like it's just another vendor thing that they're throwing out there, whatever that is. When you're having these discussions with these executive leaderships within the federal agencies, and I'm pretty much focused on the civilian agencies at this point, being the DoD is very different, as we know. But when you're trying to make these cells going uphill, how often have you seen that battle become effective, and what were some of the paths that were used to create that, that urgency, saying we really should get this done rather than it would be a nice to have?
Hey, thanks for the question there. Yeah, it's a great question. Culture, and how do you change the culture, right? So a couple ways to address this. I could talk from the macro level, if you will. We work closely at CISA with OMB on OMB Memo 2209 on zero trust strategy. and the Cyber Executive Order 14028. And one of the interesting things, because we had this Cyber Executive Order being released and then the strategy right after it or in relation to it, was we had an OMB and the White House had the leadership attention at the departments and agencies. And I'm talking like the assistant secretaries and deputy secretaries talking to their peers at the White House. And then more on the operational level, if you will, myself, John Sims, Eric Mill from OMB and others, we were more working with our peers and colleagues at the agencies. And so one thing when we were pushing out the zero trust strategy was, to your point, we had this top down leadership questions and asking, how can we help? And then we had this bottom up, if you will, from the operational side. So it was really a different momentum, if you will, compared to earlier cybersecurity efforts we had. And that really helped. And respectfully, for example, from the assistant directors, the deputy directors, the questions they were asking was like, we know there's bureaucracy in the way. How can we, from our leadership authority, be able to help? Because some of the change that had to happen is just, at the operational level, like how agencies were organized. Some of that has to be an organizational change. And those are difficult discussions. And so when you had that top-down leadership to give that direction or cover, it really helped those discussions. And then to your point, a little more on the technical side, one of the primary focuses on zero trust is identity. And again, going through the leadership and foresight of Eric Mill from OMB, the OMB memo, the zero trust strategy, one of the primary focuses was on fast identity online and moving to phishing resistant MFA. And for federal agencies to move to FIDO really went against a lot of, I'll just say, legacy federal policies in place. And myself and others, we had to almost go agency by agency, going where you're talking about, and meet with those different organizations and to help them understand, like explain the memo itself, explain those taskers and why the belief was. And yes, agencies could move forward on relying on identity service providers and cloud-based identity in ways that perhaps regulations or requirements before disapproved of that. And so again, like Dr. Tina was talking about, there's this meeting with each individual organization, and then there's also the top down, the bottom up relief that happened to help the cultural change inside USG.
Yeah, no, outstanding. It's definitely hard. It's at the end of the day, it's above and beyond everything else that you would think that you would have to do. You have to take that extra step to really. I'm not going to use the term sell because this is definitely something that was mandated. However, that's what you're really doing is encouraging in a very effective manner to make sure that people are getting the job done that needs to be done. Mr. Fang, this question is for you specifically around, and of course, I understand there's some aspects you won't be able to discuss, but Sean made reference here to talking about ID and data. What is the Navy doing currently to, kind of integrate those concepts and idea of not only data access and network access, but tying all that back to the identity and to provide a more clear picture on who's doing what, when, where, and why?
Okay, Heath, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Navy has a good news story. Navy has implemented within the DoD CIO construct of zero trust already, and verified and validated by red team, blue team, purple team, 150 of the 151 of the 152 required capabilities. Target level or IOC was for 2027, and FOC or advanced level is for 2030. So we are already sitting at the precipice of 2030 in terms of what we've implemented for our enterprise network. Our enterprise network it was developed within the the constraints of what we call flank speed, which is Microsoft 365 implemented for 560,000 military, civilian, and contractor members in the Navy. So that's the good news. Additionally, we have just opened for business our Naval Identity Service, which is the Navy's ICAM identity provider, which federates with the DMDC. one of the approved federators into the DMDC. So we are set to do business with our other component compatriots. Just to level set everybody, I am the Navy Zero Trust lead. I am the Navy service. There is the Marine Corps service, and together we work for the Department of the Navy, which is the component lead to DoD CIO. The challenge I put out there is that while we're not resting on our laurels, we, I think, have a problem that we need to all seriously consider. If you're familiar with if you're familiar with 365 Teams, it's about data, right? And there's three kinds of data. The data that we associate with databases and emails and other file transfer transactions. There's voice and there's video. And I think voice and video are the next bugaboos out there that need to be constrained within the zero trust environment. We are already looking at and discussing what is a multi-factor authentication look within those scenarios and within zero trust. So those are the things that we're looking at right now. Like I said, it's a good news story as an enterprise. Unlike the Army and Air Force, Navy has many what we call legacy networks, close to 200, that also have to either be modernized into our flank speed enterprise, or they accept the journey requirements of getting to 152 capabilities for zero trust at 2027 and 2030, respectively. Over.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that. That is quite impressive. And one of the things that I get asked a lot, from both my time at Forrester and previously as an architect, and now, being back on the vendor side of the world, is the huge differences between the civilian agencies and the DoD based agencies and the IC community, and how effectively you can get stuff done in a very short
Well,
matter of
I
time.
would challenge that thought. I definitely challenge that thought, because the other thing that DoD has to address is interfacing and interoperating with what we call our multi-partner environment. Those are coalition allies, those are other allied partners or other nations, as well as state, tribal, and federal civilian government organizations. In case of disaster recovery or preparedness or law enforcement, we do have interaction with the civil agencies. So I think we have to look at the United States government as a whole and not focus on whether it's DoD or civil. Over.
Okay, copy that. Outstanding. Now, Dr. Rodrig actually kind of put an interesting thing up in chat here when we were talking about that. Talking about the data and files and metadata. When is metadata enough and when is metadata not enough? Is the question that I would pose to you, Dr. Rodrig.
Well, as we use and authorize services, right, that are third party, federal shared, or others, one of the things we look at in particular is, are we tipping our hand? Are we giving a tell? Is there something that could be market moving about what we're looking at? We're very circumspect so that even our metadata is protected, because we wouldn't want, anyone to say, oh, Tina Rodrig as CFPB representative is looking at Heath Mullins and therefore her interest is interesting, right? So sometimes it isn't even the payload that my friend Christopher was discussing. It's sometimes just seeing where that is going that is interesting. And so, or what we're like, what's coupled together, right? Like I'm looking at Heath, I'm looking at Sean, I'm looking at Tom. What does that mean? And can I derive additional information based off of the data about the data? So just making sure that even as you're building your zero trust models, that you don't even trust them with looking at what you're looking at.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm going to pivot over to you based on that, Jared. With given the nature, oh yeah, you're not getting off easy today. Given the nature of your role within the Coast Guard, how important is that to you?
It's significant. I thought that Tina was making a really good pitch for becoming a counterintelligence director, perhaps, because that's sort of the vein that she was, or sort of the podium she was standing behind at the moment. That's the argument that we were making out of Cyber CI years ago. It's one of the arguments that's made out of there right now. I don't currently have a metadata issue from that perspective because my data is internal and I use it internally. But I share her concerns significantly because the intelligence community, which would be off, which you could often expect might assess that its adversaries do what they do, circling back, the intelligence community often makes a lot of value off of inferences. We have to presume or expect that our adversaries do the same. So there's an issue that we try to resolve, it's a perpetual issue for resolvement regarding OPSEC. Say somebody is authorized to access the data, but somehow the data gets out, and then you have metadata out about that. There's a tremendous amount of work that a foreign adversary, we'll just call them foreign intelligence for the sake of the conversation, but it could be any prerogative. There's a tremendous amount of information they can glean from just that little bitty thing, and in particular, the metadata. So it's of significant concern to us, but I'm not in a position to strip metadata, and I'm not in a position to control what kind goes out. So from my optic, what I try and do for the OPSEC side of the house is keep them apprised of what we are losing, but also helping them to understand the totality of what's in there and the types of things that can be gleaned from it. And that includes educating folks on what the story is that we've lost this month or this quarter from a data and metadata perspective.
Okay. Yeah, so even things going down to, this database was accessed and this file was touched by this person on this segment, and tying back into not only their identity, but the path by which they came through there. That data, of course, being hugely important because, you want a full chain of custody as to what happened, when, where, and why. Not just, something got touched and something got out. We're not real sure what happened.
Yeah, and a little bit more than that, in the sense that when our adversaries see us flinch about a piece of information, then they know that that piece of information is valuable, and they certainly can see us not flinching to other information. I would go as far as to just completely demonstrate a lack of reaction for them to even detect. I would give them nothing for free, if that makes sense.
Oh,
And that's
no,
why I called it a
absolutely.
tell, right?
Right.
You don't flick your teeth, you don't hold your breath, you don't blink an eye.
Yeah, and you don't play cards with Dr. Tina, apparently. So, yeah. Yeah, outstanding. So, Sean, I saw you making a bunch of faces here while Jared and Tina were talking to this. You have thoughts to add on this subject?
I need to be careful with this, but Einstein 3A, a program that was released from CISA to support the federal civilian executive branch agencies, was exactly applying classified information against unclassified data. And we worked with the Intel community for years on this. There was a solution in place. What I'll say is that solution was deprecated almost a year ago today, and we have a new solution in place. And I can't think of a single person that wishes we still had the old Einstein 3A solution in place. So there are some balances to be made between shared information and protecting sources, absolutely there. But I think the intelligence community's credit, and to just the government in general, we are learning how to share information in new ways. I think we had these discussions 10 years ago.
Okay, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. Well, not really shift gears insofar as it's still kind of the same stuff, but Tom, for you, when you're talking about internal to your organization, when you're trying to establish metrics for what good looks like, and not just good from, yes, the data flows appropriately, or yes, we're retaining it securely, but what does good look like from the day-to-day operational standpoint? What key metrics are you focused on when it comes to securing these networks, securing the segments, the data, and the identities of the people, or entities, I should say, not people, we call them entities now, the entities that are actually accessing this data, and the methodologies that they're using, beyond just things that you would expect mapped to the MITRE ATARC framework or something along those lines. But what other types of metrics are you looking at to try and ascertain what's good, bad, or indifferent on the network on a daily basis?
Well, I would I would look at your portfolio management and really have a good understanding how many applications are on your network and measure them against how they're implementing zero trust, because the application owners will know their applications the best and how to implement zero trust within their framework.
Yeah.
I would like to address one of the Q&A questions that came through on OT. That seems to be just a threat just waiting to happen, because there doesn't seem to be any synergy between the CIO and the facilities that house our equipment. And OT is becoming more prolific. And I happened to go to a federal energy management program conference in Pittsburgh, where I live. And it was only by happenstance that it was in Pittsburgh that I went, but there was 12,000 people talking about OT security and how do we do it. And they didn't know anything about zero trust. It seemed like I was talking to IT 20 years ago, because the vendors don't care about it. They're not trying to get FedRAMP certified. There's no motivation. FedRAMP, they're backlogged to the hilt, so they couldn't even take it on. And it just seems like it's a vulnerability that's just waiting to happen, because CIOs, their only interaction is what network access do you need and can I create a VPN for you, and thinking they're safe. And it just seems like there's a conversation that needs to take place. And I'm trying to use my community of practice to get that energy going, to have these two groups really talk about this at the next FEMP meeting, where all of the facilities people will be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Fenning, I see that you have your hand up. Thank you very much.
So to Tom's point, the Department of the Navy, Marine Corps Navy has also recognized that very critical vulnerability has to be addressed. So in our zero trust implementation plan, we do address defense critical infrastructure, which includes IoT and non-person entities that are transmitting information about power, water, everything that keeps our defense installations going. An attack on an attack on the shore installation in CONUS could very well have a serious impact on military operations in Indo-Pacific, for example. So OT is part of our zero trust implementation plan. And right now we're looking at how to best marry Mosaic, which is a framework that supports OT, with the zero trust 152 capabilities outlined by DoD. Over.
Yes, sir.
Christopher,
Absolutely.
to that point, I became really keen on this subject when I know a family friend that was hired by the Navy to go around the country and check all of their IoT. That's when I first got interested with it. So kudos to Navy for being on top of this and doing pen testing on all of their operations.
Yeah, no, if I can add to this too, right? I think
Yes, please.
DoD is looking into OT very seriously as well. What I've seen on Department of the Air Force side is, I mean, as you mentioned in your plan, right? You had DCI. Ours, in our scope of what's currently on the Secretary's table to sign, is everything that has a chip is in scope for zero trust. And so and you talked about how, well, the threat maybe isn't here yet. It's here, and it's been here for some time, right? You look at Colonial Pipeline, you look at in 2017, you can Google this. I literally can't make this up. A casino in Vegas was hacked, and they had 10 terabytes of data stolen from their fish tank.
Yep.
And so right. So we have all of these systems that are connected. They're 20, 30, hopefully not much older than that, years old, and they are connected. And it is extremely scary, because you can't put, system-based security controls on these without, risk of overheating a CPU and burning a building down. They do not have the type of safety measures. They do not have the type of security measures in place that traditional IT systems do. So I think, to kind of get back to the question that was in chat, right, with the plan to implement ZT and OT environments, it's really going to go back, unfortunately, to the network side. And I know on IT, we're moving away from networks, right? That the idea is we're moving that security perimeter further and further south as far as we can to the resource, to the data. On the OT side, it's the same thing, but we're only going to be able to move that security perimeter so far down. And likely that's going to lead us to network-based segmentation and defense until those systems get updated and begin to take, system-based security controls and begin to do authentication, authorization in a ZT manner.
Yeah, outstanding. Dr. Tina, you had something to add to this?
Yeah, I would say that in addition, the military was the first to recognize that like Fitbits and things like that were giving, operational data just as people were running around. And in the Ukraine, they're also seeing that, social media will definitely also give, as Tinder or equivalent, that has been leveraged by the Ukrainians to figure out where Russian troops are, who they want to date, and how to get further information. So, it's astonishing how much you can learn, not just from your on network devices, but from where people will naturally go. And then the last part I would say about that is for things that are on network that can't be modernized. One of the things I've seen done at IRIS and other places I've been is to create these hothouses where things that cannot end up having physical and logical containers that are separate from what we think of containers on the AppSec side, where you can't build it into the application or into the device, but you create, that type of hothouse to keep that delicate orchid that you can't do because nobody writes COBOL as well as they used to anymore, and build it around it since you can't build it in it. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's outstanding. And guys, I'm so glad that OT has come up so many times, because I can't tell you how many times I've worked with organizations, both commercial and U.S. governmental, and not just the U.S. government, by the way, but other organizations where they say, "Oh yeah, no, our OT environment is completely secure. It's air gapped. It's over here." Meanwhile, there's a management back channel that goes back to the main room, and that management back channel is being looked at or observed by something or no one. Hopefully it's no one, but the concept that we're taking too much and saying no, we're good because this is the way it's always been done, and we can't really look at it. But even when you're looking at ICS and SCADA protocols and stuff, they look the same. They look the same all the time, which means if you see something that falls outside of the scope of normal, that's a cause for concern. If you all of a sudden see encrypted traffic running on this network or going to a new IP address, those are all things that are cause for serious concern. However, people just forget about that because it's on a management network going somewhere, and it's okay. We did an upgrade on our air gap network, and we initiated it from this panel that happens to sit on the same network segment as my data repository. So yeah, of course we're safe. So I'm really glad to hear you guys bring that up. And as we're kind of we've covered a little bit of a theme here in the past 15 minutes or so, talking around applications and network segmentation, micro segmentation, understanding the dependencies that are created by an application. And yes, a lot of the app devs, those system owners, they understand what it's supposed to look like. But how often does it occur that they don't really have an idea of what that library they pulled down off of GitHub does until they actually initiate that section of code within that, whether it's been through a SAST, RAST, or DAST tool? Maybe that call wasn't made during that scan or that code. Justin, when it comes to stuff like that, especially as we're on this digital transformation path, how are you recommending to the folks that you report into and that you advise that the application owners get better acquainted with the concepts of zero trust? Because there's this huge gap, security and application dev, that's something different. So how are you addressing that?
Well, I think in what we've done at Air Force, Space Force, and what I've seen being done now widely across the DoD is it begins with education and training, understanding. Not every application owner, the tip of their mind isn't on cyber, right? It's on providing a service that their application provides. And so security is not at the forefront of their mind, and it never has been. And so it's kind of audacious to think all of a sudden they're going to know what zero trust is. They don't. And so making sure, you know, we're providing these education lanes through, and I know DAU, Defense Acquisition University's got several courses now on zero trust. We're beginning to bake it into a lot of our P&Es and a lot of our CDEs in the military, especially with a cyber focus, but also with zero trust, on what the future, what this framework looks like and why it's important, and how it basically the framework works as a whole, right? The concept, so that these application owners can begin to understand the concepts, and come to the table and say, hey, my application can take these controls. These are the X, Y, Z parameters that I'm going to require for a user to access the data on this application. That way I can make sure that they're actually authorized to access, and we assign an appropriate risk score for them to be able to access. So I think it begins at education, and that's what I've seen so far.
Okay. Jared, kind of the same kind of question to you, but how effective has that been within your organization? Understanding, of course, that you run a team of very highly skilled individuals, but propagating that message around your organization, has that been a successful or uphill battle, or more of a everybody kind of gets it and we should really kind of run in this direction?
Which message do you mean, Heath? I'm sorry.
It's okay. I don't pay attention when I talk either. More along the concepts of socializing this message among, you run the insider threat program, so letting them understand that they may be creating something in which there's an inherent vulnerability, or whether it's intentional or unintentional. How are you helping to socialize this message within your organization and broader within the organization to say, hey, there are other dependencies, there are other things that happen and get created when you apply A or B, or a new app gets spun up, or whatever that looks like?
Yeah, I would say that I have a pretty good success rate educating north on the echelon, but south into the operational environments, I would say probably not as much success, but probably not as much effort either. My venue for communicating into the workforce is largely concentrated around delivering INW info, and then pressing out sort of educational material about the overarching concept of insider threat, and things like that. And then, of course, training. And this just, it's such a small topic for us that it really doesn't come up as much as we might think that it should. And I don't mean to make it small. It's a big deal with regard to the things that we're talking about right now. But in the grand scheme of what I have to get done on the year, it's such a small area that we would have to be at a much more refined and mature state to try and take on something like that as sort of a messaging platform on our own. So I would say probably not a lot down. Do a relatively good job going up, but I mean, when you go up the echelon, you're just making a bunch of heads nod.
Yeah, as we're all nodding here, yes. Dr. Tina, you had something to add to that?
One of the things we discovered is that giving a training, giving a briefing, sending an email, sending 10 emails had little to no effect. But one of the things we deployed with our communication strategy is, as dictated by organizational change management theory, is that people really pay attention to things they have to sign. It doesn't have to come from OHC. It doesn't have to come from, it could come from someone as simple as your CISO. And I co-run the insider threat program here. So what we did is, not only did we make someone sign the roles and responsibilities, we made their supervisor sign. And then all of a sudden people were paying really close attention to what this is, because anything you have, it's very rare that people have to sign things that they are personally responsible for in the federal space. And it had to be a Fed was the rule we made. So, and it's pretty easy to make a PDF with a signature block, friends. So I would invite you to consider, if you really have well communicated with a formal acknowledgement of what that role is, even if it isn't an OHC performance or conduct question, it's just a, have you heard me? do you acknowledge that you want this role? And we had one person hypothetically who didn't. And it was great to know, not because, and we found someone else because if they're not committed to even signing a paper, I need someone else to fulfill the obligation.
That is deliciously evil, Dr. Redrick. I swear. Good grief. Even borderlining on sinister. Yes, please, Justin.
Yeah, if I can add on to that, one of the better things, or things we've had better luck with downward communication, is really focusing less on the security impacts of zero trust and more about the second, third, fourth order benefits. Right? When we talk about security, cybersecurity for the past 20 years, you think about the CIA triangle, the triad that we all learned last time we studied for a certification test, whenever that was. Most everything we do in cybersecurity focuses on confidentiality and integrity, right? And it's usually at the expense of availability. That's how you make things more secure. Well, I think with zero trust and what we're being able to enable is near infinite availability, because as we bring these security perimeters further and further south, as we actually tag, label, and protect our data and have data access control mechanisms in place, the network becomes nothing more than a transport anymore, and you can get to near network resilient or near infinite network resiliency because the internet becomes your backbone. You don't need to have VPNs anymore that to access certain types of data. You look at a lot of the Fortune 500, they've gone completely away from domains. They're domainless today. They have gotten rid of VPNs. All of their company's proprietary intel sits on the internet. That's where it lives. And they've used these zero trust access controls to be able to still securely access and restrict access. But those benefits, that's the luck we've had when talking to those application owners, to those data owners, rather than starting from a security perspective and saying, hey, we need to lock this down.
Yeah, no, that's that's great. We're really tying a really nice bow on this, guys. Outstanding. So Sean, I have something for you here. So as we're talking about, the network, and this is kind of based off of what Justin, and then we're just was kind of going through, not just around, the signed responsibility, shared responsibility model is definitely something out there, but when we're talking about these hybrid networks that almost every agency, almost every organization globally has, what are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of, the best way to secure that data, whether it's cloud, multi-tenant, hybrid environment, or a full cloud environment, when we're talking about not only the access controls, but the traceability and accountability coming back with the actions taken upon that data, wherever it may reside?
Yeah, sure. So, I hear in the discussion earlier there, we're talking about IT and OT, and there's always questions, or when can we just talk about T, right? When can we talk about technology, not to bifurcate our discussions? And unfortunately, I think we're going to still be doing this for decades plus. But to answer your question, Heath, so I can give an example. I was a board member for 3 years on the Technology Modernization Fund, the TMF fund. And just for everyone's awareness, the TMF was $1 billion allocated from Congress to help federal agencies move forward on modernization journeys. And so over my time there, we awarded somewhere around like 800 million of it. I think 25 plus agencies, over 30 or 40 plus awards. And so approaching the modernization part of the question, some agencies, when they had their proposals to the TMF, they baked zero trust in their proposals. So like Veterans Affairs or Custom Border Patrol or agriculture, they would stitch in like the different principles, if you will, going back to NIST 800-207, zero trust architecture. They'd stitch in those principles, or maybe they'd talk about technology, but answering the question, why are we using that technology to help meet the mission, right? How are we helping either veterans or maybe banks or maybe people at the border getting information, services, or funds faster? So that's one way we're seeing organizations modernize their systems. Other boards, proposals that came in, like Department of Education, GSA itself, were more explicit in saying we want to turn our organization into a zero trust architecture. We want to explicitly, and this is more from the CIO or CISO perspective, be able to migrate to more, orchestrated or automation responses. Get off my program I supported for 10 plus years, a TIC program, the old legacy firewall stacks, and move to a more modern SASE type solution. We wanted to move off the legacy identity solutions. A lot of time, discussions with agencies around identity was actually collapsing their identity stack, right? They may have tons of different identity providers and collapsing them down to just 2 or 3 different federated providers for the entire agency. So again, so it's 2 different ways to approach us, either stitch the zero trust cybersecurity principles into your proposals, or more explicitly say that we need these tools in place to help shift the entire organization. And to your point on like how this happened toward the hybrid, we're going to be hybrid for decades plus. Even like I think on the civilian side, I think Krista Russia and some of the budget discussions that came out last year saying for the zero trust migration is going to take 10 plus years. And you do the math, and we still got the satellites out there, right? The Voyager satellites 1 and 2, and they're 15 billion years of 15 billion light years or miles away. It
There
takes
you
a
go.
light day to get data to and from them. No one's saying we need to put EDR, a CrowdStrike agent on those satellites or stuff. And so we're going to be hybrid for years to come still. And it's just always that Goldilocks question: how do we balance security and availability? Going back to what Justin was talking about.
Yeah, geez, God, I wish we could really get into the satellite warfare and what that means from a cybersecurity perspective, but I don't think we have enough time for that. Yeah, but you did kick off something that we haven't quite touched on yet today. Let's talk about a little bit about automation and what that means. Because it's great, and this kind of circles back into everything else that thematically you have to have the right people in the right place doing the right thing and understanding how to perform their function, because their function is vital in the cyberspace, IT space, and I don't care. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of opportunity there. But when we're talking about automation, getting rid of, I don't like to use the term low hanging fruit here, but the easier to remediate things. The things that maybe that level 1 analyst, doesn't necessarily need to tie themselves up with or get into a bind. Let's provide them with a workflow or provide them with a series of actions to take, along with all the background and supporting information, moving forward, wherever that threat was identified. Mr. Fenning, this question is for you. How, if you can, to the extent to which you can describe this, of course, how has that functioned within the Navy from an automated perspective? How have you been able to push this type of thing forward, with the understanding that it's literally taking work out of the sailor's hands and the contractor's hands? And you're muted, by the way. Okay, he may have stepped away, but it was a great question.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
You hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you now.
Somehow the program muted me. I didn't mute me.
Okay.
2 things. One, let's go back to operational technology. Navy, and I'm sure the other services, are still employing time division multiplexing based technology that dates from the 70s and 80s. That has to be accounted for in terms of our plan, either by being mediated by some other kind of device that provides that cybersecurity, or just spending the dollars to blow it away and come up with an IP alternative. Then at the operations level, Navy has its Navy Network Warfare Center in Suffolk, Virginia, and their job is to protect ashore and afloat networks 24/7. When you got 500,000 plus users and all this technology, old and new, passing data around, there's billions and billions of transactions going on every day. And so the human should be properly focused on what is the immediate threat. So the implementation of artificial intelligence to prioritize and identify important threats for immediate action is probably the focus that we're going towards. And that means working with once again, a phalanx of vendors who have got all kinds of solutions and trying to sort out who's really got the best secret sauce here. But that's where we're going. Over.
Okay, copy that. Yeah. And Phalanx was not on my word of the day calendar, so good job in throwing that out there. Guys, we're coming down to the last 5 minutes here. I'm just going to kind of open it up right now. I didn't see any questions sitting in the chat. Anybody in the audience or anybody on the panel, is there something that's just near and dear to your heart around, network security, zero trust, generally speaking, something that's really keeping you awake at night when you're looking at, not only a fully matured zero trust implementation, but a little piece, a little kernel of wisdom that you would like to pass along to our attendees today.
Heath, Jared, I wouldn't say that it's a kernel of wisdom that I've got, so I'll try to keep it short to give somebody a better opportunity to actually make people smarter around here. But as far as automation goes and coming on the tail end of the Navy, machine learning, AI, things of that nature, they're things that we're working really hard to develop back here to take some of those menial tasks off of young analysts and maybe young data scientists' hands. Things as simple as having machine learning algorithms that can predisposition data in a post-processing sense. There are a significant number of roadblocks that you encounter when you try to implement what would otherwise be considered in an IA environment rogue code. And just saying that alone is probably evidence enough of how hard it is to develop and implement an automation solution that's probably not portable, is generally going to be one of a kind, that's responsive to the specific data that your organization creates. We're working on it. We've cracked the nut, so to say, on a handful of those issues, but current policy and then STIGs, et cetera, they sort of get in the way, as they should, from a security perspective. If you want to go back to CIA, not the agency, of course, the triad. They sort of really, really put the dampers on our ability to automate.
Okay, yeah, outstanding. Let me see. Something from Bill McKenna here. How can the principles of secure by design enhance the implementation and effectiveness of a zero trust security model, particularly in complex modern IT environments? Ooh, who wants to? Okay, Dr. Rodrigue, go right ahead, please.
So I am personally passionately in love with secure by design because it really takes a foundational view of how we are architecting and engineering these systems, what the design is, and ensuring that we meet 100% of the cybersecurity requirements, and not just 853 friends, like 863, 800, 218, all of those things, and put it at the front end as when it's the least expensive and most effective. So that if we pull all of those requirements and not just shift left of the boom, but also shift left of the build, left of the buy, left of the budget, so that we have sufficient resources, we'll be better, faster, and more bionic easily. So secure by design in many ways is the answer.
Okay, outstanding.
Hey, good to hear from Bill McKenna, but I think we need to scroll through the list of attendees before we start having these questions come in. No, joking. Good to hear from you, Bill. But I want to send my time over to Tom. Tom, can you do a quick plug on your community of practice? Because I know we're running out of time. But real quick, Tom's group was nice enough to host myself and others from CISA 5+ years ago, right before the pandemic, when we were releasing TIC 3. And we got to talk about zero trust and the TIC program. And really, Tom's group was one of the first ones to help launch what happened across the government for zero trust. I just want to give Tom a shout out, but I'm sure he can pitch something else in the community practice. Over.
Sean, thanks very much. We do run one of the largest community of practices in the federal government. We have over 4,000 members, and we hold a lot of topics. I am posting it. If somebody from ATARC can repost the link for the hub. We just did publish the hub that extended out to the state, local, tribal community as well. And we trying to get agency best stories out for other agencies to hear, because they really feed on this stuff and it's really been valuable. I really appreciate CISA and Sean's support as well as many others for supporting us on that.
Okay, outstanding. Well, we are at time. Everyone, thank you so much for joining myself and ATARC today. This was a great conversation. I'd love to do it again in the future, except for maybe this time if we can do something about Jared's background. But aside from that, yeah, so thanks so much, everybody, and I hope everybody has a great day.